All right. Are we set? We can start. Awesome. Can you hear me very well? Fantastic. All right, so let's talk a little bit about the games. But first, thank you very much for having me here. Thank you, Yaroslav. Well, he's talking, he's not listening to me. Thanks again, it's great to be here. And well, I'm really happy, and I hope maybe we'll see each other at GIG, at the GAC conference. And also make sure if you're going to GAC that you maybe want to join the PGA. That's like the very huge, it's like a Polish Gamescom. It's a really interesting thing going on at the same time right next to the game industry conference. Now, I'm gonna have a little speech about, I call it narrative tropes in graphic design. And what I wanna talk to you about today is basically how the narrative and gameplay design and my art department can benefit from each other in the process, and how they have to go hand to hand in order to help us get out the best product to the market. Now, but first let me very quickly introduce myself. My name is Tomasz Kisilewicz, as it's been said before, and I am a lead artist at 11-Bit Studios, so I came to you from Warsaw. And so far, it's a blast, but who am I? It's not really important for today's speech. What's more important is who are we as 11-Bit Studios. Now, do any of you know our games? Who did play This War of Mine or Frostpunk? Okay, I see a few hands here. Okay, that's quite good. That's gonna make the second part of my speech more difficult, but that's fine. So who are we as a studio, and what is our DNA? Well, to explain that, I'll use one of our slogans that we're using in some marketing communication channels, and that goes with "Make Your Mark." And what do we mean by "Make Your Mark"? Well, first, obviously, we want to make our mark as developers. We want to make our mark by delivering to the market creative and unique experiences. But there's the other side to that quote, and we want our players to make their own mark by experiencing the product that we deliver to them. We want them to feel that through the gameplay, what they're doing matters, that they're experiencing something unique, and that it's actually meaningful. And that leads us to our second motto. Now, this is meaningful entertainment. What do we mean by that? Well, we want to be an alternative to the AAA titles. Now, we grew up from the indie movement, and even though we are growing up in size, we still consider ourselves as a part of the indie movement. So we want to be an alternative to the AAA titles by delivering the AAA quality, but putting a certain twist on the games itself. We really want to be creative, but in an industry like game dev, in an industry that is so fast-paced and so competitive and changing so fast, being creative is really hard. Like, you know, we always say you have to think out of the box, but in order to think out of the box in our industry, in many cases, you have to think about the box, create the box, get out of the box, think about it, and repeat that process over and over and over again until it maybe clicks and you might get the experience you were looking for from the very beginning. But that's not always the case because the process is very long and you might get lost in this process. So let me show you some examples. Now, it is 2011, and it's just roughly a year and a half after 11-Bit Studios was established. And we released to the market a little game called Anomaly Wars on Earth. Now, it is the middle of indie apocalypse. There are so many titles coming to the market, and there's like hundreds of tower defense titles. So how did this small game that was basically made by like a garage band type company in Poland without almost any marketing budget, how was it able to surface and be quite successful on all the major platforms? Well, we needed to put a twist on the game itself, and we did it quite literally. What I mean by that, we had switched the roles inside the gameplay. So what we had created here was actually, we called it a tower offense game. And by doing that, we had achieved a fresh and quite creative gameplay, something new and fun to play, but it also helped us to have that marketing angle to help in putting the game outside to the market. Now, 3 years later, it's November 2014, and we are releasing our biggest title up to date, This War of Mine. And it is a smashing hit. Like, this game helped us become who we are today. It helped us, employ so many great experts. It helped us to grow to the size that we were aiming for. That game on PC only sold in almost 3 million copies, and I don't really know the numbers for mobiles and for the consoles. So what made This War of Mine special? Because at the prototyping stage and as a core gameplay, this game was, just a scavenging game with a side view and some Sims-like mechanics while doing the shelter, etc. What made the game special was the setting. It was the setting and the emotional wave that we had put into our title. This War of Mine was a war game told from a civilian perspective. In war, not everyone is a soldier. That was one of our first marketing slogans. And actually, everything you need to know about the game is in that picture. It's taken from the first teaser trailer. Because what you see on the left side of the picture, it's like you've seen it so many times before, like every year Activision is spewing out one of those games, right? How many enemies have you shot in those games? I guess thousands at least. But you've never seen what's happening behind those closed doors on the map, right? And that's what we wanted to express in the teaser trailer, and that's what we were aiming for with the game itself, to show the civilians' fate. Actually, in the movie industry, there is this term, maybe you're familiar with it, and it applies quite well to the game development as well. It is the elevator pitch. The elevator, do you know maybe the elevator pitch? Yeah, sure. So so I'll say it very quickly. It means that your story or the scenario you're working on is good if you are able to pitch it during a single elevator ride. And a war told from a civilian perspective, well, you can do it between one floor, I guess. So that applies very well here. We also, in game development, we're using the term of a grandmother's pitch, and because it's easy in development to get too much into detail. Sometimes something special about your game lies in the details, and it's not easy to communicate that to the players, to your customers. So I actually did a grandmother's pitch to my grandmother, and it means that in few single sentences you can explain to your grandma what the game is about. I did it to her, and I told her, because she was like super curious about what am I doing for the living. She's still quite surprised I can live for that. But I told her, like, yes, this is this game, and you're just a civilian. You're basically not doing much. You just want to survive. You just have to survive, get some food, gather some maybe bandages. And she stared at me like super surprised. And she looked at me and said, "Oh, can you do that?" Well, we could, and we did, and it was a great success. But 2018, and there is a whole new task to toggle. Frostpunk is a whole new animal. It's the biggest budget we ever had, the biggest amount of people we ever had, the longest development process. It was rough. But Frostpunk came out this April, and it turned back its development cost of 4 years plus marketing in 66 hours. So far, it only came out on PC. The consoles and the Mac versions are coming on. It was a great hit. So why am I selling you all this marketing mambo jumbo? We were supposed to talk about stories, right? And some graphic design. Well, because we have 3 brand new titles here and 3 new IPs. 3 new IPs in a day and age where anything that's not a sequel or a reboot or an adaptation of something you already know is considered a high risk. So how were we able to pull them out so successfully? Well, first of all, we needed to have creative and unique ideas. From a story perspective, from a setting perspective. But they had to be followed by a strong and distinct visuals, by a certain mood that would support everything we have from the gameplay design and from the narrative design into the product as a whole. Let me go back to this war of mine for a little bit. I showed you those pictures before. And these are some design concepts that we are starting with to find some basic mechanics. There already you have some sort of graphics. This is the product without its skin. We can have a setting in our minds, but we have to decide what kind of skin it's going to wear, what kind of clothes we're going to put on it. That's a very early concept. It's even hard to consider it a concept. Actually, my art director who drew this said that this is the art prototype. We're prototyping art. We're not concepting it. That's not that part yet. It was just a single, very small piece of paper and this sketch. But why did we use this sketch? Those of you who already had played this war of mine know about the pencil sketch. You can see it very well in this GIF. This is this full screen effect that is covering the whole screen. Why did we use it? Well, for the story and this very harsh setting we wanted to show, it was important to find some kind of visual device that would help us distance the player from the events. Because when you're doing something so depressing and this, as the story of war that is actually based on true events of Sarajevo, which is like one of the most horrible stories you can hear about wars, you need something to help players get out of this world when they need. That's where the pencil came from. Yeah, you can see it very well in here. But there is also this 2.5D section kind of view. It's a side view, and some people think it was like came out of nowhere. We just didn't have resources for something else, maybe. Well, actually, we were prototyping a top view as well. You know, being in a shelter is like Sims. Why don't we use a camera like in the Sims game, right? But top view is getting us actually too detached from our characters, while third person or even first person is getting us too close to the events. And when, for example, our children dies on the screen, we want to be sure that we can get a little distance. Looking at the game from the side view, we can feel a little bit like a guest who's looking at those events, and we can have this grand feel of war, and we can understand the story of a war, but we doesn't necessarily need to feel the horrors of it all the time. But we didn't also want to get too cartoonish, so we needed some sort of realness. We needed a layer of realness into our game. So first of all the characters in the game were the Kinect scans of our employees and some friends of us, and there were some pictures supporting the story. They were all taken inside our offices and surroundings. So we added that certain level of realness into it. We didn't want to get too cartoonish. Now, Frostpunk is a whole different animal. Who did play Frostpunk? All right, awesome. Did you like it?
Yes.
All right.
The best RTS for a few years.
Awesome. Well, I wouldn't call it RTS, but it's good to know. Yes. No, actually, many people call it RTS. But yes. So actually, how would I call it? You called it RTS. How would we call Frostpunk? What is this game? Let's think about it. What is Frostpunk? Well, I think I've said it before, and at the very, very core, Frostpunk is a society survival city builder. Now, it is a catchy phrase. Like, it can get your attention, and if you are into survival games or if you're into city builders, you might be really interested in this title, but it doesn't necessarily paint any image inside your head. It doesn't tell you anything. Is it next city skylines? Or is it the forest? Like, what kind of game is it? So with Frostpunk, it's not as easy as it was with this War of Mine. we have to go a little bit deeper. So Frostpunk is a society survival city builder based in an alternative reality of 19th century England. Well, all right, now we know how 19th century England looks like, right? So we have this Victorian style in our minds, and it is a city builder, so there must be some buildings, Victorian style buildings, society, industrial revolution, right? So we have this society of workers, and we can, when I think about 19th century, I immediately think about misery and poverty. So yeah, we can have that pain, that image in our heads, but those of you who had played Frostpunk, you would agree that that's not all that game is, right? There's something more we need to communicate. So let's go a little step deeper. So Frostpunk is a society survival city builder based in an alternative reality of 19th century England, where you are the leader of the last city on a frozen earth during a steampunky snow apocalypse. All right. Now that's telling me a lot, and I have a very clear image in my head, right? So there's a snow and ice because it's a snow apocalypse, and there's steampunk, awesome. And I had all those informations put there before, and I am a leader, hooray. Now, the problem is, we don't want to look, we don't want our cover of our game to look like our first concept. That was the first concept of our cover, because we wanted to address all those informations. Of course we didn't, because we wanted our cover to look like this. And actually I didn't do it on purpose. I mean, I didn't write down this text on purpose, but every single word is apparent on this cover. We've got a frozen world with tall ice walls. There is this steampunky generator, and there are we as a leader surrounded by an angry mob that's probably gonna kill us soon. Everything is apparent here, but it would not be possible to jump from this little text to that image immediately. Like, there had to be a long and difficult process of finding some key visuals for the game so that we could address the world that our narrative and gameplay designers were creating. Because before Frostpunk, there was Industrial. I'm not sure how many of you are aware that this game was supposed to be something different, and it was cancelled. That actually extended the process of creating the game. But Industrial was supposed to be a steampunk city builder with some of the elements of Frostpunk. It was supposed to be sort of a steampunky Tropico, I would say. But we felt like it didn't have that 11-bit fingerprint on it. Like, it was missing something. And our narratives, they knew that we want to tell a story about people, that we want to tell a story about people and hard decisions about the society. So we needed to give them more harsh circumstances. We needed to put them into an apocalyptic world, into a frozen apocalyptic world in the end, so that every single decision would really matter, so that we could have this ticking clock behind our heads all the time, that every single decision is a matter of life and death, that it really matters, that it's meaningful. So the frozen world came to life. And now something opposite happened. Like, before, those story-wise decisions has influenced the art of the game, because our art department right now was able to pull out this very interesting frozen world, and that actually allowed them to spread their wings in creative ways and release like new amounts of creativity into the product. And by doing so, they created the whole. Like, this whole was going back and forth, like they were just concepting the city, and sometimes we knew there's going to be some kind of a generator. We didn't treat it as a literal heart of the city, but we knew it's a steampunk, so it had to be like coal-powered with a lot of steam. But this hall was such an interesting landmark. It was going back, and we knew we want to do it, but we didn't want to treat the hall just like a gimmick. We wanted it to have a certain wave into itself. So, actually, the whole, which was completely visual decision, actually the whole gave our narrative and gameplay designers something they didn't know they were looking for, but it was there because it enhanced this emotional level of the story. It enforced the feeling of claustrophobia. We actually felt like alienated more behind those walls. It was something similar to this War of Mine, where you were bunkered during the bombing inside the city. Here you were bombed by the frost outside those walls. And so they had right now this very interesting framework that came actually from the visuals department. But the whole gave us something new also when it comes to the way we build our city. Once we had the circular hall and once we had the generator in the middle, it became apparent then we really need to have a circular placement system. Because we were trying to squarify the circle for a very long time, but it didn't work and it wasn't as sexy, you know, as this circular grid. So we decided to iterate it, and after many iterations, because circular grid, when you have so many objects with different sizes, it was a big thing to tackle. But apparently, from that visual decisions about the hall, we had a very new, innovative placement system, something creative that has never been done on this level before. And thanks to that, from those quite bleak and generic steampunky concepts I've showed you from industrial, we ended up with this. This is the final product, the city, the last city on Earth in Frostpunk. But I could actually, as a graphic designer, I could talk a lot about what's happening here and all the particle systems and the heat map for the city and the shaders, all those interesting stuff. We can speak hours about that, but that's only the top layer of Frostpunk. Actually, the heart and soul of the game lies somewhere underneath. From the very beginning, even in the industrial era, the heart and soul of Frostpunk was supposed to be society. It was supposed to be people. But in opposite to this War of Mine, we didn't want to treat people as units, as a group of units. The feel of society was very important for us. Obviously, we had to start with their looks. So, as I've said before, 19th century is like a best stock images bank for misery and poverty, so we had a lot of references, right? But we needed to add a certain level of uniqueness into this. So, of course, we had winter clothing and some steampunky gear on people. And in a very early concepts, those Frostpunk lanterns came to life as an element of unifying the society. We actually have one of those in the office. So, if you're in the Warsaw, please come to our office, and it's actually working. And it doesn't need to be plugged in. But that lantern helped us unify the society in the game view and in the conceptual terms. We had many different genders and classes and ages of people, but it was at this point, from conceptual point of view, it was important to have a certain unity of those characters to unify them. And while you're playing in your city view, you can actually click on every single citizen. They're going to work exactly where you send them, and all of them, they have their own names. You can check their health, their status, their family relations, because those people are also related with each other. And actually, if next month Radosław comes here, he was in the main part responsible for working on the EI of those huge amounts of people, because trust me, like the biggest challenge when it comes to optimization of Frostpunk was to counting the AI for 600 people at the same time, because every single of them, he has like his own behavioral tree. So you should come next month. It's going to be very interesting. But as I've said, I'm not that interested in people, more into the single people, more about society. So, how do we show visually the ways society as a whole communicates with us as a player? How do we show their needs, their demands, how do we show how they react to our wrong or good doings? How do they react to the things we do as a ruler of the city? Well, we had those two main channels, decisions and laws. Now the first one was basically served thanks to the CTA, call to action. And these are some special pop-up windows that appear during the gameplay. Now small messages are something, some random events or some comments on laws that we assign, etc. And full screen messages happens only in the most important moments of the game, something you cannot skip or cannot ignore. You can ignore those, but only until some point when it, when it kicks you back. But again, we didn't want this to be a UI heavy game with just blocks of text. I feel like many strategic games, they fall into that hole of big chunks of text and tables, and I feel like playing Excel many times, which is pushing me away from those games. But also, those images are a great device to enhance the story, to show emotions. Like one picture says more than 1,000 words, etc. So we needed to find a good way, some key visuals to communicate that. And that was one of the first. That was one of the first iterations. These were very cool animations. They were looking great, and we were so excited about putting them into the game. But those of you who had played Frostpunk, you know very well that never happened. We had to replace them. Well, that's the sad moment in the development process when you have to shrink down because it's too production heavy. So we knew we have to scale down because we were not able to pull so many of those out. Our designers were actually iterating those events until the very last days of production. Like few days before the review, there were added some new iterations of those events, and there is actually over 600 of them. It was not possible for a company our size to provide so many animated CTAs like this. So we had to went for something different, but something that would still have this emotional core as those animations. So we ended up with those parallax sort of illustrations where there is a certain movement, there are some effects, but it was not as production heavy as the animation. But it also helped us with something more that we didn't know at the time that we scaled down. It helped us to have a bigger chunks of people. We would also never be able by animation to have like 10 people in one image. And here it was possible. So again, we get closer to talking about society, which is pretty ridiculous that I'm telling you this with a single person on an image. But here it's like more visible, it's more clear. And this is an example of a big CTA. Like people are angry about thefts. So we were showing emotions through those CTAs. For example, anger. And we were actually showing escalation of those emotions. So for example, we had like the 3 steps of anger. First, they were angry about those thefts. Then they started protesting because we didn't do anything about it or we did a pretty bad job. And at the end, there is riot, and that's like the final CTA because they are overthrowing us. And when they overthrow us, actually, that's also showed through the CTA. And in those, we really wanted to show more of the story of what happens to the city after we left. Because we can be banished, we can be killed, or something happens and the whole city gets frozen and people are all dead. Actually, that lamp on the bottom, it's flickering, and when it goes off, the game ends. But by those CTAs, we're also setting up a certain mood for the scenarios, for example. Like we had the tech haven and refugees. We wanted each of our CTAs at the beginning to have a different mood to get players into different parts of the scenario. Emotions. But Frostpunk is not only about depression. It usually is. It's not only this harsh and bleak game. In many cases, we wanted to show some hope. And, for example, families reunited, or scouts going back from convoys. We wanted to capture this certain warmth in those images. Warmth in this frozen world. Well, that's a hard thing to tackle, right? But again, something from this war of mine comes back, and it seems I cannot do presentations because it's not supposed to be tone E. It's about tone, and it's really important very early on to set a right tone for your game, especially when you want to talk about those hard things as this war of mine or Frostpunk. You don't want to get too hardcore, and that's actually the easiest thing, to go too hardcore, to get into, you know, exploitation territory, to get into something called misery porn, where you, and it's so difficult because when you're working on this title so long and it becomes your work every day for a few years, you're not so emotionally detached as the player who's experiencing this game for the very first time. But on the other hand, you don't want to get too subtle, because there are some details that you might lost by just not showing enough. It's great to be more metaphorical, as you can see in the middle, to, you know, amplify some stuff and set the right tone very early on. Now, I told you a little bit about things that happen at the moment and how do we communicate them, but how do we show the future? How can we give to the players some clues about what's going on to happen once they make a decision? We don't want to tell them, like, if you're gonna sign child labor, your kids are going to be sad. That's quite redundant. Once again, we need to do it through imagery. And what let me go back. I'm gonna talk about Book of Laws, because that's where we're setting things for the future. We are signing up new laws. That's a very important part of Frostpunk. And of course, by designing the Book of Laws, we had, once again, a lot of references from the papers for the UI, so we ended up with this great tree. And what is important about the tree, that was a design decision, that everything should be irreversible. Because the time span of the gameplay is not very long, so it would be quite ridiculous if we could reverse the laws we're making. It should be a decision made very quickly, and we have to deal with the consequences until the end of the game. These decisions help us shape our society. But once again, we didn't want it to be so UI heavy. We didn't want our game to be about tables and text. So you see, like, half of the screen is an image. And it's an image selling a certain emotion. And it is a certain emotion about the things that may happen in the future. So few more examples. We're also signing some nice laws, right? It's good to have a pub in the city. Overcrowded hospitals, amputations. Like, if you sign a law about amputations without a visual representation of them, that's like nothing. That means just, okay, I'm getting my beds empty. That's great. People can't work. That sucks. But when you have those images, now you can see more clearly how it affects you. And in a city builder, in a game that's like such a huge scale when it comes to the perspectives, that's very important to have those devices. Now, for those who played Frostpunk, you know very well what that is. To the others, I'll have to make a little spoiler here, because something happens in our story that makes us face the decision. People are very angry, they're very discontent, and we have to do something to get them together. And we have to choose the path. Are we going through the path of order and discipline? Or are we going through the path of faith and spiritual strength? And now, in both those cases, there is a thin line that we need, as players, we need to know if we want to cross the line. Because both those paths leads to dictatorship or fanaticism, leads to extremes. And you don't want to spoil those extremes early on. So the tree of purpose in the Book of Laws is a great example of progression. It's a great example of progression in visual ways. First, you're assigning a house of prayer. No? Awesome. Who wouldn't want to have a house of prayer? Probably it's quite warm there. And yeah, we can gather. Why not? If that's going to raise the hope, that's great. Yeah, okay, maybe we need to have obligatory evening prayers. That also helps to gather the society. And if some people don't like it, well, maybe let's sign those faith keepers. And what's happening here? Well, actually, we get more purple color. There's getting more contrast, and those images are getting like less and less pleasant. Our society is getting shaped into a direction that we maybe don't want to shape it, but we might have to for economical reasons, because coal is ending, because wood is ending, because we don't have enough food. So maybe those who oppose us, maybe we need to send them to the public penance. We need to show the example, right? And look at the images. Look what's happening with the UA. It's all leading to the point of breakthrough. We're becoming the protector of the truth. And then this burning thing, we're signing new faith, and I'm not going to show it because it looks really cool and I don't want to spoil it. Last thing, because I'm talking for a while, because that might be quite surprising, is where else can you also put some story tropes, right? I remember it was like 2 months before the release, and I was talking with our art director that we have this very generic main menu. And we started doing some concepts. How might it look like? First, we had some top view imagery, but it was very similar to the end log that we have after the game that is showing the progression of our city. And we still wanted something with the society. But we knew, like, we're talking about society in many times. Maybe in the main menu, because it's outside of the main game, maybe here we can get even closer to the people. So here we're getting personal. Like the camera is going in, and we can actually even read some details about those people. We don't see their faces. That was also our decision to cut their faces at their noses. That was a problem with 4 to 3 monitors. But we wanted to cut their faces at their noses. We didn't want to see their faces because this is a society, but maybe there are some clues. And we could actually shape the story inside the menu because those people are connected. If you read very closely, they all have some kind of connections. That's the girl from settings is the daughter of the woman from the main menu. Spoiler. All right, so I will wrap up very quickly because probably you're gonna have some questions. I will be happy to ask them. So the mood amplifies the message. And the mood is this bond between the design and art. Visuals are the language of the game, and it all has to empower the message of the game. So it's very important to have a game with the message. And that actually would be it from me. Thank you very much. And thanks.